Hey there, you are welcome to the CSEA Podcast. CSEA is an independent, non-profit research organization that conducts evidence-based research for effective policymaking in Africa. In this podcast series, our guests would provide in-depth analysis, discuss policy implications, and suggest potential solutions on key development issues such as education, climate, energy, data governance, health, and food security. My name is Ave Michael and I am your host. On this episode, Dr. Adedeji Adeniran, the Director of Research at CSEA, joins me to discuss the impact of the subsidy removal in Nigeria. Hello, Dr. Deji, how are you doing?
Thank you, Heve. Thanks for having me this.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure having you here as well. So, fuel subsidy. I'm sure lots of people have heard about fuel subsidy. So let's try to break this down for probably somebody that might not have any understanding on what's fuel subsidy. So what exactly is fuel subsidy?
Fuel subsidy, I mean, it's like any other support government gives. You know, when we talk about government and the interaction with the economy, or whether household or firms, one form of it is government actually, we talk about taxation, in which government takes out of your income or profit. The other side of it is sometimes government also give, and when government give, we talk about subsidy. And so in the case of fuel subsidy, government actually ensures that as citizen of Nigeria or someone who would actually live within the Nigerian boundary, even though the cost of fuel could be any amount, government decided to say, okay, this is the amount I want the citizen to pay for this commodity. And many reasons why government actually tries to support or subsidize fuel. One reason that we've seen in the past years is the fact that, Nigeria is a fuel producing country. So, and given that we produce this, okay, people should enjoy part of that. And in a way of saying, let's share these resources, or let's give these resources. But that's actually not a very sound, convincing argument for why we have subsidy. Most time when we see subsidy, subsidy is in a way an attempt by government to encourage some activities or to support or to drive economic growth and development through some certain activities. And when we look at fuel subsidy, there could be an argument for that, to say that Nigeria, we have a lot of economic activities that are linked, whether transportation system, our industry, and all of that. We don't have this electricity, we don't have this alternative source of energy that could actually power industry or most economic activities. And so we keep relying on fuel. And for that reason, subsidy, it's one way of encouraging or ensuring that people also benefit in that area. So in a way, we've had fuel subsidy in Nigeria in a way of government supporting the people. But let us know that when fuel subsidy was first introduced in Nigeria, it was something that actually was introduced for a very moderate time as part of palliative or cushioning effect of some economic effect in the 1980s. And after that, it has become very, very difficult for governments. There's been a lot of kind of argument that we need to remove it, but it has been very difficult things to actually do over the years. Reason being that honestly, we've built a whole kind of economic structure around petroleum availability. Both legal and illegal kind of economy has emerged out of that. And in the past, I think one of the key arguments that really has been sustaining the fact that, okay, government corruption, and most of, even if we stop paying subsidy, maybe some of this money then go into inefficient government services or lost due to wastage and leakages within the system. However, things have changed dramatically over the past years. One of the things we've seen is due to problem of exchange rate problem in Nigeria, combined with the fact that illegal oil refinery that is taking place, yes, and also illicit, all sorts of, people selling it above the board. We find out that the consumption itself, like I said, when you subsidize something, you are encouraging an activity. you find that there's actually a very huge increase in our consumption. I mean, sometimes some to our neighboring countries, even locally. But that's not the argument to make for why government needs to stop it. But we actually reach a level whereby we are borrowing to pay this subsidy. Because one, we are not meeting our production quota. Exchange rate problem is also an issue because we are also not producing this ourselves. We import them. Of course, if we have been importing them, that doesn't eliminate subsidy, and that will not actually change the dynamics so much. But I mean, if you combine all of these factors, the effects over the many years, it creates a kind of a fiscal dilemma for the policymakers in terms of should we continue to actually fund this that is going to contribute to fiscal challenges. We are already on the path of fiscal crisis. We're borrowing so much. Our macroeconomic fundamentals is actually on the negative side, every one of it. Exchange rate disparity, inflation, growth is weak, FDI is not doing well. We are doing so badly on all of such indicators, and one of that problem is around the exchange rate and also the fuel, the subsidy issues. And so at that point in time, I think increasingly it becomes the fact that we just need to do something and fuel subsidy.
Yes, but that's very interesting to know. I think with this, a lot of people have in-depth knowledge on what exactly fuel subsidy is. Okay, thank you, Dr. Deji, for that insightful explanation on what exactly fuel subsidy is. So I think the next best question to ask is, are you in support of fuel subsidy? Are you in support of it?
I mean, based on my research in this area, of course, I would say I'm in support of government removal of for subsidy. At CC, we did a research around 2017. And also, we've been tracking oil sector governance under the work Nigerian Natural Resource Governance Charter within NRC. And part of our work we've started this work since 2012, and we did the tracking of oil sector governance and performance for about 7 years. We have also been working on energy sector performance over the years. And I think one thing that it's quite clear is the inefficiency of that sector. And the fact that fuel subsidy is part of the problem why we are not making the best out of oil sector, both in terms of revenue and the performance, but also in terms of attracting right investments. If you are subsidizing fuel, one problem with that in most instances is it kind of constrain investors, because the prices is not well set, it's not market determined, and these are an international price of goods and services. So in a way, you're creating or establishing a factory, and you don't know the price you will be charged. So your fate lies with the government, and so you have to have this kind of government supporting or government approval. So it's then end up like not an economic decision, but a kind of political decision. And that kind of politics, we know the inefficiency that always emerges out of that, because if you have to sell price below what you should be selling it, government needs to be supported. And if government don't like you, you might actually be out of business. So it's something that actually doesn't encourage foreign investors to come into that sector. But so the argument against that would be, okay, if we improve our efficiency, if we reduce corruption and everything. And I think that's a major point. But the question, I think, for me, why I like the fact that I have been advocating for subsidy removal over the last 5-7 years is the fact that if you compare what we spend on for subsidy, you find out that it's always, in many years, tracking the years, more than what we are spending on education, what we are spending on health, and what we are spending on even agricultural sector. If you combine all that, for example, in 2022 budgets and what government already estimated for 2023, if you combine all what we are going to be spending on fuel subsidy, it's more than what we are going to spend on those three social sector: health, education, and agriculture. and in good conscience, looking at what the poor Nigerians are facing. So you see, okay, maybe more of our resources should be going into those sectors than fuel subsidy. But more importantly, our research, I mean, as part of this research, we've looked at who benefits more from subsidy. And again, you find out that it's actually the rich that benefit more from this. So if you compare what in terms of consumption, and consumption, it's actually most of it actually go to people that are actually the rich, so they benefit more. So how would the government that is facing a poverty, about 88 million people in poverty, how will you in good conscience also be supporting these very few rich people? It's something that I don't see that as efficient. I don't see that as inclusive. And I think the argument we need to make is the fact that if we are not subsidizing, what else could we do to the poor that actually directly goes to them, support them, and enable them to actually be part of that socio-economic structure in the country and put them on the pathway to escaping poverty? That is actually, to me, more of what we need to be discussing. How do we reach out to the poor people in Nigeria? It's a question that we need to answer and the right direction to go, rather than we talking about subsidy, which in its way inefficient in many ways. It's also creating a lot of economic problem that is not enable us to actually even think straight and develop non-oil sector and oil sector itself.
We do hope you're enjoying the podcast episode with our guests so far. To get more information or to view the full version of the publication for this topic, head over to our website at cseafrica.org. Okay. Well, very interesting analysis there, exploring the pros and the cons of subsidy and what we should focus on. You did mention that the reason why it was done, I think you said in the 80s, also it was to cushion the economic depression at the time. But it would almost seem as though since the subsidy removal that things have gotten only tougher, or things have gotten only harder for citizens, especially the poor. Given that subsidy has been removed, what can the government do?
So, like I said, the argument should be about now. I mean, it's not about should we remove subsidy, but how best can we actually reach out to the poor? And I think what government should do is how best do we ensure that the poor benefit more from government targeted interventions. Obviously, I think everyone in Nigeria has actually been affected in one way or the other.
Of course.
By the subsidy removal. We are all feeling the pain, but the question is when that is expected in terms of what key analysis have already shown in terms of, I mean, when we remove the subsidy, the price reflective regime that would emerge, it's not something we are used to, and that kind of volatility and uncertainty also it will affect pricing. It will have a knock-on effect on food prices and other prices. However, in the immediate time, I think government needs to actually this is one area I think government is actually didn't do quite well, given that we all have been saying that subsidy should be removed, and there's actually even been a negotiation, or there's World Bank grant even to support some of that. Government-owned fiscal palliative should have actually been ready, such that by the time you removed it, we don't need to be waiting. I mean, this is 2 months, and I don't know anybody that has received any form of palliative or not. So in a way, we should have actually bring out the palliative much more early. I mean, when the president was speaking recently about some of what he's thinking of, he mentioned transportation system. He mentioned providing support to SMEs. He mentioned some kind of cash transfers to elderly and vulnerable populations. Yes. And those are things that you expect as a priority that we should have done. But I think we should not have waited for 2 months afterwards for us actually. It should have been something that we faced in immediately, so that the shock is not so much. And I think waiting too much was actually one of the reasons why we have this so much effect from subsidy. But I think what I would say is this: one of the the biggest benefits of subsidy removal that can actually reach anyone, the best palliative the government can give to us is good governance. Not just giving people money, but good governance. Because inefficiency that we talked about in subsidy regime, we can't transfer that into the post subsidy regime. Because whatever you think about, inefficiency will destroy it. I mean, whatever economic development you think
You come
about,
up with.
corruption or inefficiency. So how do we really, really eliminate that kind of problem in all on other sectors? I think it's part of what government needs to think about in terms of how do we reset the Nigerian economy. But more importantly, I also believe that in the long run, we need to also think about vividly our non-oil sector. One of the shocks to the system has been the fact that we are relying on a product that is the price is determined internationally, of course, and the fact is we also even don't actually generate much forex because of whether oil theft and all other like we ought to. Global economy is undergoing transition, such that there's a lot of shifts towards alternative energy sources. And I think non-oil sector development, we need to prioritize that. We need to start that as part of the kind of shifts in policy framework. So I think in the short term, government should focus more on the palliatives, such that the effect is not going to be as big as wage restructuring it should be part of the deal, but also support for businesses that government has promised. But I think that should also be something we actually continue to inject into the economy for the next 1 to 2 years. In tandem, I believe government needs a very firm sectoral policies. It's not enough for us to correct the macroeconomic fundamentals. If I'm an investor in the US and I'm looking at what the government is doing, I would hear about subsidy removal. I would hear about exchange rates reforms. But then when I want to come in, how should I come in? I think we still need to actually simplify that for investors. And that is what sectoral policy could do. You remember in the past, we've had several policies, ERPG, we have 7-point agenda. Transformation agenda too was there. So what we need to start thinking about is what are the sector we want to prioritize so that we can develop the value chain in that sector and we can grow those areas of non-oil sector. So those kind of sectoral policy would actually give investors a direction. And it's not just we saying we are prioritizing it. Government then should show kind of easing kind of bottlenecks in such a sector. If there is input, if there is infrastructure, if there are kind of we don't always say that government should not subsidize, but you don't subsidize consumption, you subsidize production so that you can encourage production in sectors that you really, really want to change. So that's actually the critical step for government in trying to address the problem in subsidy.
Thank you very much. I really do agree with you with prioritizing of non-oil sectors, especially at this time, and also sensitization, because a lot of people, fuel subsidy was just a word that they kept on hearing, but they were not really sure what it was. They just knew that at some point, fuel prices would go up. That's most people, that is their only understanding of subsidy. But I appreciate that you went in depth and just let us know. Also, I agree with the promising and fulfillment of like the palliatives and most of the things promised to cushion how intense everything is right now, and also consistency from the government. These are all key issues, and I'm so grateful for you coming here today and letting us know all of this, especially for people that have little or no knowledge. Dr. Deji, thank you so much. We really do hope to see you another time on the podcast. Any parting words?
Just to say that policy reforms, in as much as it's good, it's a process that we have to be deliberate about. And we need to actually rethink and see the direction such that we don't think, oh, we've done it and that's the end and go and sleep. We need actually sustain monitoring, tracking of the effects and effectiveness of what we've done, and continue to actually sustain momentum around other complementary policies. It's not just for you to say one policy is okay, but there's a role for monetary policy, there's a role for other structural reforms, other fiscal interventions too are quite critical. And so we also need deeper partnership in achieving this. Government working with non-state actors in order to ensure we address some of those challenges. Like people used to say, Nigeria has revenue problem. But the question is, if you look at our revenue problem, it's a major issue that we need to also address. Because it's when you actually grow your revenue that you can spend more and you can tackle the big infrastructural deficits, you can tackle the big problem in industrialization, you can tackle all these things that government we really want to see. So we need to actually develop our financial capacity in all those areas.
Thank you. Well, hopefully it is a step in the right direction. A very big thank you to you, sir, Dr. Deji. It was a pleasure speaking with you today and sharing your thoughts. And to all our listeners, thank you for listening. Until we meet on our next podcast episode, take care and be safe.